Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Good day everyone. This is Group 1 and I am Friendly Mark H. Andrino. And for today's video, we will be talking about performance-based assessment. So first and foremost, let us talk about the learning outcomes of this topic. So the first one is to define the following terms: performance-based assessment, product assessment, performance task, performance, alternative assessment, authentic assessment, and other terms related to performance-based assessment. The second learning outcome is to describe the nature of performance-based assessment. The third one is to describe the methods of scoring essay and performance tasks. The fourth one is to list suggestions of preparing performance tasks for assessment, which is followed by the fifth one, which is list suggestions for scoring performance tasks. And the sixth one is differentiate traditional assessment from performance assessment. And the seventh one is to identify the necessary skills in assessing process, product, and performance. The eighth one is develop scoring rubrics to assess process, product, and performance. And the ninth one is to discuss the steps in developing performance-based assessment. And the last one is to identify the different issues related to performance-based assessment. So, what is performance-based assessment? Okay, we will be giving you the definitions of PBA. So, performance-based assessment is one in which the teacher observes and makes a judgment about the student's demonstration of a skill or competency in creating a product, constructing a response, or making a presentation. That's according to Macmillan in 2017. In this assessment, the emphasis is on the students' ability to perform tasks by producing their own authentic work with their knowledge and skills. So basically, after like a class discussion, the concepts that has been introduced by the teacher to the students will then be used by the students in order for them to create products. So what are these products? These are activities that are conducted by the students, and then the end return or the end process of that, or the product is the one that has been produced after the lesson. So basically it includes a concept paper or like a research paper, a video, a performance, and all that. So performance-based assessment is also known as authentic assessment or alternative assessment because it shows the authentic knowledge of the students after tackling the lesson. So, performance-based assessment, or PBA, is an alternative form of assessment that moves away from traditional paper and pencil tests. So this is very, out of the box or conventional. It's because, you are veering away or you are moving away from the traditional pen and paper tests. A lot of activities can actually be done in order to do performance-based assessment, and it involves students producing a project, whether it is an oral, written, individual, or group performance. So basically, you can let your students do an oral recitation or a speech, or you can let them write an essay, or maybe if it is like an individual or a group performance, like an acting skit, or a musical. So yeah, you can do a lot, okay, if you use PBA. The students are engaged in creating a final project that exhibits understanding of concepts they have learned. Performance-based assessment process the creative aspect of the students in bringing out what they know and what they can do through different performance tasks such as exhibits, projects, and some more examples. Hands-on experiences allow them to be more critical, motivated, and involved when they are allowed to perform on their own. So basically, you are letting the students, kind of like express their creativity and showcase what they got, showcase what they learned in order for them to create the product using the PBA method. Students can acquire and apply knowledge, skills, and work habits through the different performance tasks which are meaningful and engaging to the students. Types of activities that best exemplified performance-based assessments include, but not limited to, writing a research paper or research report, solving and conducting experiments and investigations. So basically, this is very much common in science classes where students do experiments and investigations for conducting research reports and research papers. Usually it covers like a lot of subjects as well. Return demonstration or like demo, speech, skit, role playing, constructing and implementing seminar plan, or creating video presentation are among the activities that you can let your students do in order to conduct PBA and to actually assess what they have learned, what they have got from the lesson that you have just discussed to them. So these are the features of performance-based assessment. Number one is that greater realism of tasks. What does this mean? So you are going, if you use PBA, you will get a greater, realism of tasks, because the tasks that you've used are then, that you want your students to do are then realized. Greater complexity of tasks. Since it is an authentic assessment, it requires, it is very much complex because it requires a lot from the students, right? Well, if you compare it to the traditional way of assessment, like pen and paper assessment, it was just very easy because you would just let the students choose, like for example, if you do multiple choice assessments, you're just gonna let them choose between the choices, or maybe if you just want to let them supply the answers. However, if you use PBA, it is more complex, and it requires greater complexity, and it requires more effort and dedication from the students. It also requires greater time, greater time needed for assessment. So you can't just require them to do a skit in 1 hour, right? If you want a solid product from the students, then you need to give them more time to do the assessment. Greater use of judgment and scoring. So basically, you need a criteria or a rubric for this one in order for you to avoid subjectivity. So you should be objective in assessing, the students' output or the products that they have got, that they have produced. So let's just talk about the difference between performance-based assessment and traditional assessment. So I guess you already know, the difference between these assessment strategies or tools. So for traditional assessment, it measures learning indirectly, like pen and paper tests. So it's indirect, and compared to oh my god, I'm so sorry. This was supposed to be PBA or performance-based assessment. I'm just gonna edit this one. So basically, PBA, measures directly the learning competence or like what students learn, because in PBA kasi there is an application or like direct application of what the students learn. However, if you use traditional assessment, why is it indirect? It's because you're just soliciting knowledge from them without even applying, without the actual application of what they have learned. But if you use PBA or performance-based assessment, then you can see that what they have learned, they can actually apply it, because that's what learning is for, right? For application. The students will not only remain stagnant in the classroom, they will go out and compete outside in the world. So basically, application really matters. What they have learned, they can apply it. So these are the domains of performance-based assessment. The first one is communication skills. So it covers communication skills, like for example, writing an essay, or like delivering a speech, or maybe a debate, or like an oral recitation. You can do a lot in order to assess their communication skills. Psychomotor skills, like for example, holding a pencil or a pen properly, focusing a microscope, following a procedure, or like bisecting a line. So like it involves psychomotor, the psychomotor parts of your body. Athletic skills, shooting a basketball game, diving, pitching a strike. So basically it involves like sports activities, and that involves the body. In addition to that, you can also for concept acquisition, like acquiring, organizing, and using information. Like for example, if you would take them to a field trip, and then you're gonna solicit what they have learned, acquiring knowledge. Like for example, you will require them to do a travelogue or like an infographic of what they have learned, so they can apply organizing and eventually using the information. Affective skills, like for example, mental and behavioral skills, obeying traffic rules, sharing sports equipment. So basically this covers the affective area or the affective level.
Hello, good day everyone. So today I am going to discuss about types of performance-based assessment, the focus of performance-based assessment, advantages of performance-based assessments, and the limitations of performance-based assessment. For types of performance-based assessment, there are three types of performance-based assessment, and these are products, performances, and process-oriented assessments. A product refers to something produced by students providing concrete examples of the application of knowledge. In here, from the word product, it means that something that is made. So, the students will provide a concrete product wherein the product is based on the application of their knowledge from their topics that was discussed in the class. Examples can include brochures, reports, web pages, and audio or video clips. These examples are generally done outside of the classroom and based on specific assignments. For the performances allow students to show how they can apply knowledge and skills under the direct observation of the teacher. These are generally done in the classroom since they involve teacher observation at the time of performance. Much of the work may be prepared outside the classroom, but the students perform in a situation where the teacher or others may observe the fruits of their preparation. So, in performance, it is the applying of knowledge and skills that can be done by the students, and it was directly presented to the teacher or others for the judgment on how it was going the performance of the learners. Yes, it can be prepared outside the classroom, but the performance should be inside the classroom. Performances may also be based on in-class preparation. They include oral reports, skits, and role plays, demonstrations, and debates. The third one is the process-oriented assessments. It is providing insight into student thinking, reasoning, and motivation. They can provide diagnostic information on how when students are asked to reflect on their learning and set goals to improve it. In here, the students will think, their reasoning skills will be enhancing, and they can also motivate by having a learning logs, self-peer assessment checklist, think aloud for their thinking and reasoning, and the individual or pair conferences. Next is the focus of performance-based assessment. According to Granlund, use the process when there is no product. The process is orderly and directly observable. The teacher should always monitor the student performance. Correct procedures or steps are crucial to later success. Analysis of procedural steps can help in improving the product, and mind you that learning is at the early stage. Also, according to Granlund, use the product when different procedures result in an equally good product. Procedures not available for observation. The procedures have been mastered already, and products have qualities that can be identified and judged. Advantages of performance-based assessments. There are many reasons teachers should incorporate performance-based assessments in class. This type of assessment has many advantages. First, the direct observation of student ability. The teacher will directly evaluate the student after performing a task, and it will be an advantage for the student. Second, active student engagement. Yes, the student will become active, and it will be a great privilege for the student to be competitive, especially in public speaking. Next is student choice. It is their choice because the performance will always be an application of their knowledge and their special skills. It is dependent on them on how they will perform. Flexibility, authentic assessment of ability, assess complex learning outcomes, assess the process as well as the product, communicates instructional goals related to real world, assesses progress as well as the performance, specific, direct, and understandable information are available to the parent of the students. Evaluates the whole student because right after the student perform, the teacher will evaluate it. Enhances the professional skills of the teachers, can establish a framework for observing the students, and can contribute to a meaningful curriculum planning and design of educational inventions. Then we have here the limitations of performance-based assessment. While performance assessments are important in creating a holistic look at a student's overall performance, these assessments can't necessarily be used in the same way as standardized assessments. As with any assessment, there are disadvantages of performance-based assessment. Just like for an instance, the performance assessments often rely on a specific skill set of the student, such as creativity, flexibility, or a willingness to engage in public speaking. Performance-based assessments have disadvantages for students who may not feel overly creative or willing to present their knowledge in front of a large group. As an educator, we should know our students because students have differences, like there are students who prefer to show their creativity through nonverbal. Thus, in performance assessment, it will take them as disadvantage. Other disadvantages of performance-based assessments include can be very time consuming. It will be very time consuming because in performance based assessment, just like what I have stated, one of the examples of the performance based assessment is role play. So yeah, the role play takes time. I mean, it consumes a lot of time. Can possibly be costly, relies heavily on student initiative and drive, relies heavily on specific skill sets of students. Results can be subjective because it is more on the learners. So by being subjective, the scoring will be questionable. And then for the measurement, limited scope because it was not for all. Not all the students will show their creativity through performing it. So that would be all for my report.
Good morning, everyone. I am Sala and I will be your discussant for this part. Since we were able to finish discussing about the definition of performance-based assessment along with the domains of performance-based assessment, its types, and its limitation, we will now be moving forward on how we could develop performance-based assessment. Performance-based assessment share the key characteristic of accurately measuring one or more specific core standards. They are also known to be complex, authentic, process or product-oriented, open-ended, and time-bound. Performance-based assessment have recently experienced a re-emergence in education, literature, and curricula. In the 1990s, performance-based assessment became a valid alternative to traditional multiple-choice tests. In the years that followed, legislative requirements shifted the emphasis to standardized testing, which caused a decline in non-traditional testing method. But currently, more schools, districts, and universities are seeking authentic measures of student learning, and performance-based assessment have become increasingly relevant. So, to determine how we could develop performance-based assessment, let us first have a recap of what is a performance-based assessment. The definition of performance-based assessments varies greatly depending on author, disciple, publication, and intended audience. In general, a performance-based assessment measures students' ability to apply the skills and knowledge that they learn from a unit or units of study. Typically, the task challenges students to use their higher-order thinking skills to create a product or complete a process. That was according to June 2010. Tasks given within a performance-based assessment can range from a simple constructed response, such as a short answer, to a complex design proposal of a sustainable neighborhood. Arguably, the most genuine assessment requires students to complete a task that closely mirrors the responsibilities of a professional, such as, for example, an artist, an engineer, a laboratory technician, financial analyst, or consumer advocate. Moving forward, how can teachers develop performance-based assessment on their students? Normally, students are presented with an open-ended questions that may produce several different correct answers. But in the higher level task, there is a sense of urgency for the product to be developed or the process to be determined, as in most real-world situations. But to provide a specified procedure on how we could develop it, we should consider the following steps. The first one is that define the purpose of the assessment. What does it mean when you say defining the purpose of the assessment? We should first remember that the purpose of the assessment should be considered in making decision in the subsequent steps of the process, because it is where the whole process is gonna revolve with. The result of assessment is used for grading purposes and scoring scheme. Number 2, determine the skills, learning outcomes, and taxonomy level. It is where remember that performance-based assessment should assess higher order thinking skill and cognitive outcomes of student. Activity or the performance task given to them should suit the purpose and objectives of the learning outcomes and the taxonomy level. The third one is that design and develop performance task. The next step to consider is to create an activity or task that will allow the students to demonstrate the knowledge that they have, their skills, and attitude. In designing the activity, it should consider the time allotted or the time that they might use in making the activity possible or finishing the activity, the availability or the feasibility of the resources. It is where they have the privilege to have an access with the materials that they might be using in performing a task, and of course, the information or the data that they might be needing in doing that so. So, in designing and developing a performance task, how can we design and develop a performance task if we don't have a knowledge regarding with its definition? A performance task is any learning assessment that asks students to perform to demonstrate their knowledge, their understanding, and proficiency. Take note that it is a learning activity and also a common means of assessment. Performance tasks yield a tangible product, result, or performance that serves that students are learning. We should take note these 4 words when we refer about performance tasks. It present, process, and create product. Moving forward, what are the features of a performance task? A performance task should have an intended learning outcomes that serves as a guide in designing the performance task itself. Take note, it should have learning outcomes. Next, students should be active participants within this task. Third one is that students are expected to demonstrate their ability to apply their knowledge and skills in real-life situation. The fourth one is a performance task is a clear, logical set of performance-based activities, whereas rubrics should be available in assessing it. How can we construct a performance task? After knowing the features and the definition of a performance task, let us now identify how can we construct a performance task. The first thing to do is we should focus on the learning outcomes. It is very important because it will serve as a blueprint by which how a certain performance task is performed or executed or accomplished. In focusing on learning activities, take note that the cognitive skills and the student performances should be aligned together. We should not only focus on the cognitive space but also the experiences that students are experiencing within the learning experience should be something that is authentic and by which they would really learn from it. Second is that we should develop tasks that represent both content and skills. Just like what I have said earlier, the learning process should not only focus on the cognitive skills but also allow them to experience the learning itself. The third one is minimize the dependence of the task on skills relevant to the intended purpose of the assessment task. The fourth one is provide the necessary scaffolding for the student. We should allow our students to do things on their own in some parts of the performance task. We should only help them when they needed help, but when they can do that, when they can perform it by themselves, we should let them do it. Also, a performance task can only happen if there is a clear instruction provided for them. So it is a task of a teacher to provide clear instructions within the performance task that we're giving to them in order to ensure that they will do it excellently or they would be able to accomplish it perfectly. Also, there should be a clear communication between the teacher and the student within a performance task. And this is something to do with the matter that providing them as well clear instructions in order to obtain understandings within the whole class. So, what are the suggestions for constructing performance tasks? The development of a high-quality performance assessments that effectively measures complex learning outcomes requires attention to task development and to the ways in which performance is rated. That is why Lean 1995 suggested ways to improve the development of the task. Suggestions for constructing performance tasks are the following. First, we should focus on learning outcomes that require complex cognitive skills and students' performance. Remember that we want our student to achieve higher order thinking skills and critical thinking skills. And if we would present them learning outcomes that are way too basic for them to do, it will not help them develop those particular kinds of thinking. Second is that select or develop tasks that represent both the content and the skills that are central to important learning outcomes. So we should give consideration within the development of the content and the skills of a student, because remember, we should not only focus on the cognitive space but also with the fact that we should nurture the skills within them, those special skills within our students. Third is that we should minimize the dependence of task performance skills on skills that are irrelevant to the intended purpose of the assessment task. The task that we're giving to them should always be connected or aligned with the purpose that we wanted for them to achieve within the assessment task. Fourth one is we should provide the necessary scaffolding for students to be able to understand the task and what is expected. We should let them do things that they can do by themselves and should only be there to instruct them whenever they needed us to be present. And number 5 is we should construct task direction so that the students' tasks are clearly indicated. So we should always be clear and transparent whenever we are giving them or delivering instruction to them. And last but not the least, we should focus on the learning outcomes. Tasks should be selected in light of learning outcomes. Our learning outcome should be used to assess. We should used to assess those that are not adequately measured by less consuming approaches. Going back with the fact that we should clearly communicate performance expectations in terms of scoring rubrics by which the performance will be judged, we have here this set of guidelines for the application of performance criteria to judge the performance of our student. They are the holistic rubrics and the analytic rubric. Talking about holistic rubric, we should take note that it is the most general kind of all the rubrics that we might encounter. It lists 3 to 5 levels of performance along with a broad description of the characteristic that define each level. A holistic rubric also consists of a single scale with all criteria to be included in the evaluation being considered together, such as the clarity of the performance, the organization, and the mechanics. With a holistic rubric, the rater, or for example the teacher, assigns a single score, usually on a 1 to 4 or a 1 to 6 point scale, based on an overall judgment of the student work. There is a generalized judgment within the performance or the work of the student. An example of a holistic rubric is the following. This is the holistic rubric. As what we can see, there is a general description that we are giving to students, by which we're just going to rate their performance regarding with its generalized description from 1 to 4. Next to it, we have this analytic rubric, which is much precise than holistic rubric. An analytic rubric, take note, it breaks down the characteristics of an assignment into parts. What is the purpose of breaking down those characteristics? It helps the rater to itemize and define exactly what aspects of the student's performance are strong enough and which part of it needs improvement. Take note that an analytic rubric resembles a grid with the criteria for student product listed in the leftmost column and with levels of performance listed across the top row, often using numbers or descriptive tags. The cells within the center of the rubric might be left blank or may contain descriptions of what the specified criteria look for each level of performance. When scoring an analytic rubric, each of the criteria are scored individually. So, to sum it further, analytic rubric is much specified compared to a holistic rubric. There is a breaking down with the parts that the teachers wanted to rate within the students in order for the student themselves to know which part of their performance is lacking and which of them are excellent. So an example of an analytic rubric is the following picture. And that would be all for my part. Thank you very much.
Good day everyone, I am Jehan Balindong and I'll be reporting the guidelines for good performance tests and the guidelines for good judging criteria. So first, let us define what is performance task. So basically, performance tasks are tasks that ask students to create, product, or perform tasks to show their mastery of particular skills. So what are the guidelines for good performance tasks? First, performance tasks must be congruent to the purpose of the assessment. So this means that the task needs to consider the goals, obstacles, and options to achieve the successful product or performance, as to convey the purpose and relevance to the task. Second, performance task elicits behavior or behaviors at the level of stated in the instructional outcomes. So performance task should help to evaluate the soft skills, like observing how students approach and work through a performance task can tell the teacher about the student's adaptability, social skills, growth mindset, and ability to persevere throughout the challenge. Third one is the performance task is interesting, challenging, and fair to all students. So this one is quite self-explanatory. The task needs to be interesting or challenging and also fair to all students in order to cultivate the students' performance. Second one is performance task is authentic. Hence, it promotes the conveyance of learning to the real world. So this means the task should be authentic, that the performance needs to connect or apply to the real world performance. Next one is performance task includes only important outcomes like performance or product that are appropriately assessed. So performance tasks yield a tangible product or performance that serve as an evidence of teaching. So when performance tasks should enable teacher to gauge student understanding and proficiency with complex process like problem solving, research, and etc. to measure knowledge. The next one is performance tasks adequately reflects intended learning outcomes. So a performance task should be performed to demonstrate the student's knowledge and apply the set learning outcomes from the set or given task. Second one is the performance task is appropriate for the development level of students. So this means that the task should be enable teacher to gather evidence not just about a student knows but also what he or she can do with knowledge. So instead of measuring students' performance, we also strive to create an opportunity for students to learn throughout the process. Next one, the direction of performance task should what is to be done, how it is done, in what condition it is done. So this one is very useful for performance tasks that can be used for engaged students in meaningful learning. So since rich performance tasks establish an authentic context that reflect genuine application of knowledge is often considered. The last one is the direction of performance task should give information and context for a successful task completion by all students. So teacher needs to give a clear instruction to the student. It is important for teachers to assess students in order to the student to get or target the knowledge of the student on doing a task. Moving on to the types of performance tasks, we have here the five types. Yes, first one is the impact of performance. This refers to the success of the performance given the purpose, goals, and the desired result. Second one is the work quality and the craftsmanship. So this is referred to the overall quality, organization, and difficulty of the work. Third is the adequacy of method behavior. This is referred to the quality of procedures in manner of presentation prior to ensuring the performance. Next one is the validity of content. So this is referred to the correctness of ideas, skills, and materials used. The last one is the sophistication of knowledge employed. Now this refers to the complexity or maturity of knowledge employed. Moving on to what is performance criteria. So these are the specific behaviors that students should perform to properly carry out a performance or product. So it should be specific, clearly stated, and observable. So what are the guidelines for good judging criteria? So this is according to Gallagher of 1998. Here are the guidelines for good judging criteria. First one is to communicate essential achievement standard of the assessed outcomes. So communication, we all know that communication is a very important step in helping a student to understand. So the set goals in doing a task to improve the learnings and achieve the learning outcomes. Second one is operationalize the outcome they intended to reflect. So it is important to precisely define the variables that you want to reflect to your students and give a specific operational definition to measure relevant concepts or consistency in doing a task. So organizing the outcome reduces the subjectivity and also increases the reliability of your task. Next one, apply across contexts that calls for similar behavior. So behavior is very predominantly dependent on a context. context according to the situation. So applying a context for similar behavior reflects to the context-dependent behavior. The next one is focus on current instruction and not to prior learning. So it is important to consider the assessing students' prior knowledge that allows an instruction to focus and adapt their plan and help them to construct connection between old and new knowledge. It has also to be observable. So observation provides the opportunity to monitor or assess a process or situation of doing a task to see the student's action and behavior within a natural context. So as they usually occur in providing the insights in understanding of a task that is being evaluated. Next one is essential for judging performance of the task adequately. So in order to measure a performance criterion will be used to determine the level of performance, it is necessary to ascertain whether the student performance on the measure indicates that the program outcome has been achieved. Next one is to communicate to others what constitutes excellence. So students need to have a fundamental drive to communicate. We all know that communication skills help to understand each other, not just their words, but also their nonverbal gestures. So considering how you look or sound when communicating with others is very important. The last one is the appropriate for the students. So basically, the given task needs to be appropriate or applicable to the student's capability or ability. So the progress of the students in doing the task is very important in observing a student performance task.
Good day! So in constructing a performance task, we have learned that a part of it is to clearly communicate performance expectations in terms of rubrics. So let us learn what are these rubrics or the scoring rubrics. Basically, scoring rubrics are used when judging the quality of the work of the learners on performance assessments, and it is one of the alternative methods in rating the performance developed by teachers, and also it is used for determining students' level of proficiency. And there are two types of rubrics, the holistic rubric and the analytic rubric. Holistic rubric is used to score an overall product or process, while analytic rubric provides information regarding performance in each component parts of a task. And here are the some uses of rubrics. First, it is a powerful tool for both teaching and assessment. Second, it helps students become more thoughtful judges of the quality of their own and others' work. And also, rubrics reduces the amount of time teachers spend evaluating students' work. Moving on to the advantages of using rubrics. First of all, it allows consistency and objectivity in scoring across the given criteria. Also, it clarifies the criteria in more specific terms, and students can identify the basis on how they are to be evaluated. Also, it allows the students to assess their own performance, products, or works. Next, teachers can use a small amount of time to evaluate the performance of the students. Next, students can evaluate their own performance and the performance of their classmates. Also, they provide specific feedbacks on the performance of the students, especially analytic scoring. Moreover, it serves as standards when preparing the task or activities against its measuring and progress is documented. Last but not the least, it provides students feedback about their strengths and weaknesses according to their performance. That's all.
Assalamualaikum and good day. By the way, I am Jonaina G Motalib, and I'm going to discuss all about the developing the scoring rubrics and the errors of performance-based assessment. So let's start with developing the scoring rubrics. So at the end of the chapter, the student should be able to explain what is a scoring rubric, cite the parts of a scoring rubrics, distinguish between holistic and analytic rubrics, and between general and task-specific rubric, cite the importance of scoring rubric, construct a holistic and analytical rubric based on a given learning outcome or competency, and last but not the least is to distinguish among scoring rubric, checklist, and rating scale. So, what is the meaning of scoring rubric? So, a scoring rubric is a coherent set of criteria for students' work that includes description of level of performance quality on the criteria. It is defined by Brookhart 2013. So, Macmillan 2007 defines scoring rubric as a scoring guide that uses criteria to differentiate between levels of student proficiency. Then, Profam 2011 describes a scoring rubric as the scoring procedures for judging students' responses to performance tests. In short, a scoring rubric is a scoring guide used to assess performance, which is process or product against a set of criteria. So, scoring rubrics are typically employed when a judgment of quality is required and may be used to evaluate a broad range of subjects and activities. So, for instance, scoring rubrics can be most useful in grading essays or in evaluating projects such as scrapbooks. So, judgment concerning the quality of given writing sample may vary depending upon the criteria established by the individual evaluator. So, one evaluator may heavily weigh the evaluation process upon the linguistic structure, while another evaluator may be more interested in the persuasiveness of the argument. So, a high-quality essay is likely to have a combination of these and other factors. So, by developing a predefined scheme for the evaluation process, the subjectively involved in evaluating an essay becomes more objective. So, let's proceed to the next topic, which is why include levels of performance. So, number one, clearer expectation. So, in clearer expectation, it is very useful for the students and the teacher if the criteria are identified and communicated prior to completion of the tasks. So, students know what is expected of them and the teachers know what to look for in student performance. So, similarly, students better understand what good or bad performance on a task looks like if levels of performance are identified, particularly if descriptors for each level are included. Number two, we have more consistent and objective assessment. So, in addition to better communicating teacher expectations, level of performance permit the teacher to more consistently and objectively distinguish between good and bad performance or between superior, mediocre, and poor performance when evaluating students' work. So, number three, we have better feedback. So, furthermore, identifying specific levels of students' performance allows the teacher to provide more detailed feedback to students. So, the teachers and the students can more clearly recognize areas that need improvement. So, let's proceed with analytic versus holistic rubrics. So, analytic rubric is like the recitation rubric mentioned are analytic rubrics. So, an analytic rubrics articulates levels of performance for each criterion so the teacher can assess students' performance on each criterion. So, using the recitation rubric, a teacher could assess whether a student has done a poor, good, or excellent job of creating ambience and distinguish that from how well the student did on voice inflection. So, in holistic rubric, in contrast, A holistic rubric does not list separate levels of performance for each criterion. So instead, a holistic rubric assigns a level of performance by using and assessing performance across multiple criteria as a whole. So for example, the analytical research rubric above can be turned into holistic rubric. So we have excellent speaker, good speaker, and poor speaker. So when to choose analytic rubric. So analytic rubrics are more common because teachers typically want to assess each criterion separately, particularly for assignments that involves a larger number of criteria. It becomes more and more difficult to assign a level of performance in a holistic rubric as the number of criteria increases. So, as the student performance increasingly varies across criteria, it becomes more difficult to assign an inappropriate holistic category to the performance. In addition, an analytical rubric between handles weighing criteria. So, when to choose a holistic rubric. So when we use a holistic rubric, holistic rubric tends to be used when a quick or gross judgment needs to be made. So if the assessment is a minor one, such as a brief homework assignment, it may be sufficient to apply a holistic judgment. For example, is to check, plus or no check. So to quickly review student work, but holistic rubric can also be employed for more substantial assignments. So on some tasks, it is easy to evaluate performance on a different criterion independently on performance on a different criterion. So for example, many writing rubrics are holistic because it is not always easy to disentangle clarity from organization or content from presentation. So, some educators believe a holistic or global assessment of student performance better captures students' ability on certain tasks, which is alternatively, if two criteria are nearly inseparable, the combination of the two can be treated as a single criterion in an analytic rubric. So, we recommend that fewer levels of performance be included initially because it is number 1, easier and quicker to administer, is number 2, easier to explain to students and others, then number 3, easier to explain the larger rubrics to shrink. So, how to decide on appropriate criteria. So, in developing or in selecting a rubric, the first question we ask is what are the criteria for a good performance or product that the rubric ought to assess. So the criteria should be most appropriate and most important aspect of quality work, which is performance or product as described in the learning outcome and not characteristics of the performance of product task itself. So like for example of aspect is the quality performance or product which are evidence of learning and attainment of the learning outcome that should be assessed by a rubric, our selection of subject, analysis of a famous person's contribution to history, support with historical facts and reasoning, book Hart 2013. So example of characteristic of the student's work, which is performance or product, which should not be assessed by a rubric because they are not evidence of learning, are cover of the report. So report on famous person is the other one, and visual also the references. So below are the criteria for classroom rubrics that should guide you in developing a rubric. So we have appropriate. So in appropriate, each criterion represents an aspect of a standard curricular goal or instructional goal or objective that students are intended to learn. Next is definable. So each criterion has a clear agreed upon meaning that both students and teachers understand, and then Next is observable, which is each criterion describes quality in the performance that can be perceived, which is seen or heard usually by someone other than the person performing. Next, we have distinct from one another, so each criterion identifies a separate aspect of the learning outcomes the performance is intended to assess. Next one is complete. All the criteria together describe the whole of the learning outcomes, so the performance is intended to assess. Last but not the least, we have able to support descriptions along a continuum of quality. So each criterion can be described over a range of performance levels. So we have another type of rubric, which is the general rubrics and task-specific rubrics. So let's go with the general rubrics. So as the name implies, general rubrics are particularly useful for fundamental skills such as writing, mathematics, problem solving, and general traits like creativity. So they contain criteria that are general across tasks. That is why they can be reused. So these general rubrics can be adapted to different grade level to make the task-specific rubrics. So next is the task-specific rubrics. It is unique to a specific task, so you can use a task-specific rubric as a reliable assessment of a performance on a specific task, such as giving answers or specifies conclusions. So, however, a task-specific rubric is time-consuming and difficult to create for all the different tasks you'd like to assess. However, it makes scoring easier. So, let's proceed with the next one. So, Brookhart 2013 explains how rubrics can ensure learning. So, number one, rubrics help teacher teach. So when teachers develop the rubrics, they get very much clarified with the criteria by which learning will be assessed, and so will become more focused on what to teach and against what criteria student success will be measured. So number two, we have rubrics can help students learn. So the criteria and the performance level description in rubric can help students understand what performance and criterion of performance are expected of them. So number three, rubrics help coordinate instruction and assessment. So furthermore, rubric enhance student or learner agency. So agency is characterized by the student's ability to set and pursue his or her own learning goals, an important ingredient for a student's success through college and careers, and most especially the height of a pandemic with when remote learning is the way to go. So let's proceed with checklist and rating skills. So, checklist is a list of specific characteristics with a place for marking whether that characteristic is present or absent. Brookhart 2013. So, checklists are used when learning outcomes are defined by the existence of an attribute. Next is a rating scale is a list of specific characteristics with a place for marking the degree to which each characteristic is displayed. So it is defined by Brookhart 2013. So for example, in public speaking, the characteristic makes eye contact, which is done frequently, occasionally, seldom, or never. Let's proceed with errors and performance-based assessment. So, for many years, teachers spent ample amounts of time testing students and trying to come up with creative ways to test students other than the basic pencil and paper test. So, teachers needs to find creative ways to get students involved, especially the younger children in the lower elementary age because they might not have the attention span of an older child who can withstand many pencil and paper tests. So a good way to get students involved in assessment process is by switching from the basic test and start using performance-based assessment. So performance tests can be completely new to the students because they are so used to the traditional pencils and paper tests that they need to be prepared for the new types of assignment and the new ways of being graded. So we have disadvantages, which is it can be found in the structure of the test. So the performance-based assessment usually don't contain as many questions, and the answers to the questions don't have right or wrong answer. The majority of them are subjective. So that is good because it allows the students or the children to show what they have learned and how they interpreted the material that was presented to them. So however, since that is subjected, it presents the problem to the teacher as to how the assignment will be graded. So we have limitations, which is everything has to be taught beforehand, and next is that can be time consuming. So learners may not understand why assessment is taking place so often or formative. Therefore, it is imperative that the teachers or educators has open conversations about assessment plans with learners. So the only real disadvantages come down to letter A, the time it takes to mark an assessment, and B is the frequency of assessment. So it goes without saying that assessments are massively important because it gives students an opportunity to work through questions and problems that resemble the content and skills required for exams. So furthermore, it offers them an opportunity for feedback, which is paramount for building process. However, too many assessment means a teacher is constantly teaching towards an assessment rather than building knowledge and skills. So a good department and or teacher is able to strike a balance, so this allows the students the best opportunity for progression. So some disadvantages of performance-based tests that are given to our children can include limitation to the teachers, such as teaching specifically to the test and not allowing the student to learn outside of the test material, as well as limiting the value of the test. So we have comparability of scoring obtained using a single performance. So in this section, we address the comparability of scores obtained using just one performance exercise with different student or with the same student on more than one occasion. So the section begins with comparability of administration conditions, then turns to comparability and scoring, and finally takes up comparability across student populations, examining some students' characteristics that may influence the meaning of scores. So we have administrative condition, comparability in scoring, comparability across student population, comparability across performance tasks, measurement intents, ancillary requirements, and error variance, comparability among tasks with the same intent, the same ancillary requirements, and the same error structure. So let's go with administration conditions. So imagine a classroom where students are taking a multiple choice test, so each work alone, silently attending to his or her own paper. If space permits, students may be seated at every other desk, so all have received identical instructions. Read from a script provided for the test administrator. They work from identical sets of printed questions, recording their responses on identical answer sheets. Rules about what happened or what students' questions the teachers may answer, which is they are to be answered, and whether calculators may be used, and condition which is similar matters here clearly specified. So the test is accurately timed. All these administration condition can be replicated anytime the test is administered. So next is comparability in scoring. So in large-scale testing programs, scoring usually follows a model that has evolved over the past decade or more out of experience with performance assessment of students' writing. So a scoring rubric is developed and anchor papers are chosen to exemplify each performance levels. So sometimes the boundaries between successive levels, so raters are trained in the use of the rubric and must attain a criterion level of accuracy in scoring a set of benchmark papers. So next we have comparability. We have comparability across student population. So every test is designed with some target population in mind. Decision about content, format, layout, timing, and instruction are all conditioned by the age, language, and culture of the intended examinees. So this is in part because the curriculum's intended learning outcomes differ according to the students' ages and other characteristics, but also because any assessment task requires skills beyond those it is intended to measure. So successful performance typically depends on examinees understanding that they should show their best work. So their willingness to do so, their abilities to understand the task requirements, and their mastery of the communication skills necessary to produce storable responses. So this and other attitude of or capabilities not explicitly part of what is to be measured but nonetheless necessary for successful test performance may be referred to as the test ancillary or enabling skill requirements. So if some examinees are deficient in test ancillaries abilities, then it is biased against them. So they will not score as well as other examinees equally proficient with respect to the knowledge or skills the test was designed to assess. So variation in scores of otherwise equally capable examinees due to differences in their ancillary abilities give rise to construct irrelevance, variance, and test scores. So finally, a major determinant of performance test scores may be student previous exposure to similar tasks given either of performance assessment or in their course of regular classroom instruction. So next, we have comparability across performance tasks. So, the previous section described risks to comparability that may arise even when the assessment task itself is held constant. So, in this section, we add a layer of complexity focusing on the comparability of scores from different performance tasks. So, following this discussion, the third major section of the chapter examines comparability of scores born entire tests. So, it will be seen there that aggregating across a number of performance exercises can mitigate non-comparabilities at the level of individual tasks, although careful test design, empirical studies, and usually statistical adjustment will still be required to assure adequate comparability in large-scale testing programs. So, let's proceed in measuring intense ancillary requirements and error variance. So, in analyzing the comparability of single performance tasks, it is helpful to think of scoring as having three distinct components. So, first is the intent of the measurement, the construct relevant knowledge, skills, or disposition. The task is designed to measure 2 seconds and the set of ancillary. So, requirements additional construct, irrelevant knowledge, skills, or disposition required for task success, including but not limited to familiarity with task instructions, motivation to show one's best work, and test with wiseness, which is wiseness. So language proficiency and other communication skills may fall within measurements intent or within its ancillary requirements as discussed in the previous section. So finally, scores inevitably include a component of error, a complex mixture of both random and idiosyncratic influence on scores. So the comparability of performance tasks is a fiction of the similarities and differences among their intents, so their ancillary requirements and their error structure. So thus it is used to distinguish these components even though it may not be possible to separate them or to determine in which of these three respects to assessment which is tasks actually differ. So last but not the least, we have compatibility among tasks with the same intent, the same ancillary requirements, and the same error structure. So if tasks require the same ancillary and intended abilities, and if the scores they yield are equally accurate for students at any given level of those abilities, then the scores they yield should be comparable. So such tasks satisfy the requirements for equating the strongest form of linkage identified by Ms. Levy 1992 and Len 1993. So in principle, given any two such tasks, say x and y, it should be possible to find a single equating function that could be used to transform scores on task x to equivalent y, which is scores, or conversely. So note that even in this ideal case, it would not necessarily to be appropriate to use the task interchangeably without applying some statistical adjustments. So one task scoring rubric might be more strengthened than the others. So for examples, in which case the raw scores from the two tasks would not be on the same skills. So not also that statistical equating methods made with difficult to apply its scores on the two tasks took on only a few discrete values. So that's all, and thank you.